Sarah had never believed in superstitions. She laughed at ghost stories, rolled her eyes at horror movies, and dismissed anything that couldn't be explained by logic. That changed the night she moved into her new apartment. It was a nice enough place, small, cheap, and just outside the city. The only thing she found strange was the massive antique mirror in the bedroom. It was bolted to the wall, its frame dark with age, the glass slightly warped. The landlord told her it couldn't be removed. Too heavy, he had said. Too quickly. The first night, she noticed something unsettling. As she brushed her teeth, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in the mirror, just a shadow, shifting behind her. When she turned, there was nothing there. Over the next few nights, the strange occurrences grew worse. The reflection would lag behind her movements. She would turn off the lights, only to see her mirrored self still staring out of the glass for a second too long. Sometimes, she swore she saw something else in there, something standing just beyond her reflection, barely visible in the darkness. Then, one night, she woke up to a noise, a soft tap, then another. It was coming from the mirror. She sat up, heart pounding. The room was dark, but in the mirror, she saw her reflection, still lying down asleep. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached out, and the reflection suddenly opened its eyes. But they weren't her eyes, they were too wide, too black, too hungry. Her reflection grinned, and then, slowly, it sat up. Sarah scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, watching in frozen horror as the thing in the mirror moved when she didn't. It raised its hand and pressed its palm against the glass. A crack formed, splintering outward like a spider web. Then, it spoke, in a voice that was hers, but distorted. Wrong. I don't want to be in here anymore. The glass shattered. And Sarah's world turned upside down. She wasn't in her room anymore. She was in the mirror. The air was cold, heavy, suffocating. She turned, but there was no way out, only the glass, now whole again, sealing her in. On the other side, standing in her bedroom, was her reflection. It turned to face her, tilting its head, but it wasn't mimicking her anymore. It was free. Sarah screamed, pounding on the glass, but the thing only smiled and placed a finger to its lips. Shoo! Then it walked away. Sarah was trapped, forever, watching her own body live her life. And no one ever noticed the difference. Sarah didn't know how long she had been inside the mirror. Time didn't move the same way here. There was no hunger, no sleep, just an endless, suffocating silence. She watched as the thing wearing her body became her. It went to work, spoke to her friends, texted her mom. No one noticed that its smile was just a little too wide, that its eyes lingered too long when it looked in the mirror. But Sarah noticed something else. Wasn't the only one trapped in the mirror. Agged voices in the dark. Then, she started seeing them, shadows moving in the reflection, twisted faces peer. Some of them had been here for a long time. Then one night, the thing wearing her body did something strange. It stood in front of the mirror, tilting its head, watching her, and then it whispered, "You don't have to be alone." Sarah's breath hitched, the shadows behind her stirred, and then the mirror cracked. Not broken, opened. Hands crawled out. Pale, gnarled fingers, too many to count. Some reached for her, others reached out into the real world. Sarah barely had time to scream before something dragged her down. The last thing she saw before the mirror sealed shut again was her own face, but not the one she had lost. A dozen copies of herself, twisted, screaming, trapped in endless darkness. And in the real world, the thing in her body smiled, because it wasn't alone anymore. It had so many more faces to wear. Sarah was falling. At least, the part of her that had once been human. She was part of the mirror now, part of the endless, writhing void where all stolen reflections were left to rot, but she could still see, she could still hear. And she could still scream. The thing in her body had changed. It wasn't just Sarah anymore, it was all of them. The echoes of every soul it had ever consumed flickered beneath its skin. It moved through her life with ease. Her friends never noticed how it stood too still, how it never blinked enough, how its laughter sounded just a little too perfect. But Sarah noticed something else. It was looking for another mirror. It was hungry. And one night, it found one. A girl named Emily lived alone in a tiny apartment across town. She had a mirror by her bed, old and warped. She didn't notice when her reflection began moving on its own. She didn't notice when, one night, it turned to look at her while she slept. and she never woke up in her own body again. Sarah saw it happen from the other side, her own stolen voice screaming in the endless void. And then, the mirror cracked, and another Sarah stepped out. The thing wasn't just taking lives anymore, it was multiplying. And soon, the whole world would be nothing but copies. The darkness around her had no end, no bottom, the air was thick and suffocating, and the whispers of the others clawed at her mind. They had all been here once, people who had looked too long into the wrong mirror, people who had been replaced. They were all screaming. She hit the ground, except there was no ground, just something cold and wet that pulsed beneath her like it was breathing. The mirror world was alive, and it was hungry. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged. Shadows slithered around her, moving like ink in water. They had no faces, just empty voids where their reflections should have been. She tried to run, but the shadows moved with her, whispering her name. Sarah, you can't leave. She turned in frantic circles, searching for a way out, and then, she saw it, another mirror. It stood alone in the void, a single, shimmering doorway, and on the other side, her apartment. Her real body, or at least, what was left of it. The thing that had stolen her skin stood in front of the mirror, staring at her through the glass, but something was wrong. Its grin had faded, its hands twitched at its sides. And Sarah realized it was struggling. It hadn't just stolen her life, it had taken too many. The faces it had worn before her were fighting back, it was losing control. Sarah ran toward the mirror, the shadows shrieking behind her. If she could get through, if she could push it out, she could take back her body. She lunged, and the thing in her body grabbed her wrist. Sarah choked on a scream as its fingers tightened like steel. It was inside the mirror now, staring at her with black, bottomless eyes. "You think I'd just give this up?" it whispered. And then, it shoved her back. Sarah fell, tumbling backward into the darkness. The last thing she saw was the mirror closing. Her body, her life, everything gone forever. And in her final moment, as the darkness swallowed her whole, she saw the thing walk away. But it wasn't just wearing her face anymore. It was changing. Stretching, splitting, becoming more. And Sarah understood. It wasn't one monster, it never had been. It was all of them. Every reflection that had ever been stolen, every face that had ever disappeared. And now, it was free. Sarah was gone. Sarah was no longer Sarah. No more laughter, no more voices, just an endless reflection of something that wasn't real. There were no more humans. Only them. They didn't need to hide anymore. They walked the streets, filled the houses, sat in offices, all wearing the stolen faces of the world that once was. They moved like people, spoke like people, but they weren't. And soon, even the memory of real humanity began to fade. The last of the mirrors, once filled with the desperate, screaming souls of the taken, finally went dark. Sarah, Emily, and all the others, their voices silenced forever. The world belonged to the reflections now. And then, they looked up. The sky, once blue and endless, shifted. It wasn't the sky at all. It was a mirror. And on the other side, something was watching. Something bigger. Something waiting. And for the first time, the reflections felt what their victims had felt. A cold, creeping horror. Because they weren't the first to replace a world. And they wouldn't be the last. The sky cracked. The entire world, the fake world, the one built by reflections, shuddered. Buildings twisted, streets warped. The creatures, the ones who had taken every human face, stopped moving. Because they realized the truth. They were never in control. They were never the top of the chain. They had thought themselves predators, but they were only another layer in something much bigger. And now, the real monsters were coming through. The sky mirror shattered like thin ice, and from the cracks something crawled. Not people, not reflections, something worse. They had no faces, they had no forms, they were pure hunger. And they had been watching. Waiting. The reflections had replaced humanity. Now it was their turn to be replaced. Sarah, what was left of her, what had once been her, felt it. Felt the void reaching for them. Felt her existence unraveling. And as the first of the new things stepped through the broken sky, she understood. The mirrors never took people. They only borrowed. and when their time was up, something else always came to take their place. The cycle would never stop. World after world, face after face. Nothing was ever real. Not Sarah, not humanity. Not anything. And as the last of the reflections were consumed, the world reset. A new earth, new people, new mirrors. Waiting. For the next time. She was just one voice in the endless screaming void, swallowed by the thing that had taken her life. And now, there were more of them, so many more. The creatures had learned. They no longer waited for people to look into the wrong mirror. They spread. Emily's body walked the streets now, smiling too wide, just like Sarah's, just like all the others. They weren't individuals anymore. They were one. And they weren't hiding. They were replacing. One by one, people disappeared into the mirrors. Entire families woke up wrong, their reflections out of sync. Neighbors stopped recognizing each other. Strangers on the street smiled too long. Then, entire towns fell silent. The government tried to intervene. They sent in police, then military. None of them came back. The ones that did, they weren't the same. By the time the world realized what was happening, it was already too late. There were more of them than there were humans. The cities fell, the streets emptied, and in every mirror, the last of the real people screamed for help, but no one could hear them anymore. Because the ones looking back were never human to begin with. And then, one by one, the mirrors began to break. Not shattered. Sealed. Forever. The world was silent.